consider the freshwater paper, and I think we were up to having comments from Chairman Leader.
Thank you, Chair. Look, the comment I was going to make is I feel for staff in this, but this situation is fluid, it's dynamic, and there's two strategies you've got to pursue here. We're either going to be reactive or we're going to be proactive. So as recently as yesterday, I had a discussion, as an example, as recently as yesterday, I had a discussion with MFE. Fiona was following it up today. So in the regulations for what they refer to as the synthetic N regulations, which came into force this month. The reporting date is the 30th of June. So you say, how did we get to the 30th of June? Because, and essentially it's a dairy industry problem, the financial year in 99% of cases in the dairy industry finishes on the 31st of May. The seasonal year finishes on the 31st of May. The ownership of farms and contracts, you know, share milkers and all that, finishes on the 31st of May. So in terms of reporting your usage from 1 June through to the following 30th of May, they all align because the people are similar. So why MFE put in the 30th of June, we're now saying, well, why did you do that? And they said, oh, because it was in the draft plan anyway. So we're trying to advocate belatedly that they need to change that date to the 31st of May. Now, whether or not we're successful, I don't know, but if we don't get it changed, it makes it really hard both for the operators to submit, because some of them won't be there and some will change. So it makes it very difficult for the operators to submit, and it means the information you're going to get as a regional council is suboptimal. So that's why there's still a lot of work to be done here in terms of implementation. And we may, and that's just one example, but it's worthwhile playing out because there's no Fiona speaking with the RCOs today and MFE to say, can we change it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillors, do any councillor have further comments in relation to the draft communication engagement plan? Councillor White.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just want to go back to the comments that the rest of my colleagues on Zoom didn't hear, and I'll promise to tone it down so it doesn't affect the electricity in the system. Basically, I made comment, fellow councillors on Zoom, that the Te Reo Māori language is a constitutionally recognised language. I know we all know that, and therefore it has its legal position in our country. Secondly, I referred to the fact that on matters of equity and looking at proportions of representation, you know, back home in Rotorua, I made the comment that the deprivation statistics are hugely high and weighted heavily towards Māori. And so my comment there was the playing field is not equal, and we need to equalise it in the context of their participation. And their participation is related also to their comments, to the use of the reo and language and interpretation of that. I mean, I have no problems whatsoever where it's positioned right now, and I think it's appropriate recognition of the engagement with iwi, because if you want to go past that particular title and look at the English translation, it's all there. It is all there. So both parties can be satisfied in that particular space. But I just want to make the point that for Māori, having the language recognised in that particular way is a huge boost to their sense of participation. And I think it's important that we recognise that. So that's my response back to the comments that were made, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor von Bartelsson.
Just a reminder that the chairman did say that we'll deal with this, and yeah, it has been raised, and we'll deal with it subsequently. So I in the interests of timeliness, I'd suggest we move on and deal with it at a subsequent meeting.
I'm happy with that, Madam Chair, but the point needed to be made because it was played on public notice.
Thank you. So, councillors, any further questions or comments on the proposed draft engagement strategy? Okay, we'll turn now to the proposed recommendations, and I will move them. Do I have a seconder? Seconded, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Rose. All those in favour, aye, against and carried. So Steph and Kate, thank you very much, and Nikki as per usual. So now we're moving to what is essentially an incredibly good news story. And I just, I really want to pay tribute to the staff involved over many years in this particular matter, notably Karen, Marion Hinton, Shane Ironmonger, Max McKay, Elsa Ware and Trish Peer Adam. Congratulations to you all and to former colleagues as well. Absolutely wonderful to see a good news story like this one. So well done and thank you. So over to you.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair, tēnā koutou councillors. My name is Elsa Ware and I'm a planner in the Kai Whakatinana team focusing on air quality. The Rotorua Air Quality Action Plan set out a high-level framework of actions that were needed to improve the air quality in Rotorua and to meet the national environmental standards for PM10, which in Rotorua is mainly from domestic wood burner smoke. After 15 years, the Rotorua airshed is now meeting those national standards. As you can see in the graph on page 85, we have had some incredible improvements in the number of exceedances over the years. A review has now been drafted assessing the effectiveness of the actions and concludes that this action plan is now complete. A key part of the success in both the creation of the plan and the implementation of the plan has been our ongoing mahi in collaboration with the Rotorua Lakes Council, as well as the other members of the Rotorua Air Quality Working Party. In tandem with this great success, however, the goalposts are being moved. The national standards are in the process of being amended with a proposed move to a limit for PM2.5, which is smaller and more harmful to human health than PM10. Monitoring in the airshed shows us that we will not meet this proposed new standard. I note that the paper stated that at the 5th of August, we had 8 exceedances of this proposed standard. This should have read 5, but to update you, there have been now 10 exceedances as of today. In terms of a policy response to this issue, we think that a new action plan will be the best place to start. Happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Elsa. So, councillors, questions or comments? Councillor Thurston.
Madam Chair, I totally concur with your opening comments that led into this particular paper. This is tremendous news for Rotorua, and I know Councillor Winters and Councillor White will share with me in congratulating the staff and, dare I say, politicians who have gone before us. But in terms of the resolutions, I would just like to suggest that we include another one there that enhances the fact that public engagement, information and communications be ongoing, because fundamental to all of this was the manner in which the communications were conveyed to the population. So I think it's critical that we don't drop the ball there. But no, well done everybody. Great news and a really good news story. And as the staff member said, no gain without pain. So no, full marks everyone. But if you'd be agreeable to another resolution, Madam Chair, around maintaining public engagement and communications, that they be ongoing. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councillor Thurston. I have Councillor Winters, Councillor Love and Councillor Nees. Councillor Winters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, taitoko iwi with your comments back to staff. This has been an incredibly long journey, and Marion and the team have certainly personalised the approach when it comes to some of these individual approaches that people have to change their fires. And she's really, I think our team's done a really good job making sure that people understand, and we've been adaptive as well in terms of our approach to people. I mean, we've taken out about 8,000 homes, which is incredible, really, over the last 15, taken out 8,000 fires out of, I should say. Can I say, also, I just want to say, I was in Bunnings the other day, and they've got a sale on for coal, and I'm thinking, really? I don't know whether these people are inside the airshed or not. But it strikes me that some of our suppliers, sellers in this area, are still blind to the effects of what we're trying to do. I know Bunnings is an Australian outfit, but do we have contact with these sorts of enterprises to say, really, people, we are just trying to clean up the air, and you guys are offering discounts for, this sort of thing. And I just think, so that could be one more action in our action plan going forward. We've got to get everybody on board. It's not just the firewood merchants. So that's the first question. The other part of the action plan is people ask me, so how many, and this comes back to, well, DHBs, but Phil Schumack, in his wisdom, has advocated for these programs, but we've yet to see any hard data on how many people are less, how many kids are less admitted to hospitals. I'd really like some good data to say, these are the effects, these are the health benefits that's coming through, because we haven't seen any. And it's really hard to sell the sizzle when you're doing this stuff if you can't pinpoint the effects on people, the improvement in people's health. Message ends.
Thank you, Councillor Winters. Elsa, Karen, you want to respond to the 2 points?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think the health issues is something that we've had for many years working through this, is the ability to try and quantify exactly how many people are affected through health issues and separate out all the other health matters that people have, has always been really, really complicated. There has been a re-released Happens report which may shed some light on that we can have a look at, but it is definitely something moving forward for the next action plan to look specifically at the PM2.5 and what the impacts of that are.
Bunnings and coal.
It's an ongoing issue. You can't stop people from selling the coal. Many years ago, I think it was one of my first jobs as a planner, was actually talking to, is it Solid Fuel that own the coal? And they said, oh yes, we'll stop retailing that in a couple of years. So that hasn't happened, obviously. So, but it's definitely something to look at moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Love.
Thank you. It's for governance and it's a quick one, but my index is totally out of sync with with the pages on the agenda today. And I can't understand what's happening. But when people are referring to pages, it isn't working. So, and I've noticed that today. So it's not governance's day today, but if you could take note of that, I'd be grateful.
Thank you. Councillor Nees, then Councillor Thurston.
Oh, thank you. And my congratulations to staff for such a successful program. My question is, in the review document, it says that on page 127, that we'll assess our future actions once the amended air quality standards are released. And I just want to ask staff why they're suggesting they get stuck into developing a new plan or action plan now. Why we don't do as we say we're going to do in the review and wait until we see the shape of the new air quality standards and then start the work.
Through the chair, we feel like we have pretty solid confidence at this point, the shape that the NSAQ amendments are going to take. So we do just want to start this preliminary work so that we're ready to hit the ground running when they are finally released. And the work we want to do, I think, would never go to waste. That we don't think they're going to turn around and say, continue as is. So I think any improvements are going to be a good use of time.
So I just would like to reinforce my comments about needing to prioritise our resources. And I look forward to getting that guidance from staff about which areas are high risk that we really need to focus our resources on and which are not.
Councillor Thurston, then Councillor White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in terms of the health statistics, just a few that I have here at my fingertips. The World Health Organization states that air pollution is the single biggest environmental threat to human health. And in New Zealand, 3,300 people are killed each or die each year from air pollution. Which is 10 times the numbers that are killed on the roads, and more than 13,000 people are sent on to hospital each year as a result of air pollution, costing the taxpayers of New Zealand in excess of 15 billion a year. So But no, I agree totally with what Councillor Winters has said. We've always put this to the medical officers of health, and they've had great difficulty splitting some of these figures out. But there's just a few to share. So no, well done to staff again. Brilliant.
Councillor White.
Yes, I just want to add for you, Madam Chair, congratulations to the staff and also support the comments of my colleagues. In the context of implications for Māori, again, Māori are socially disproportionately included in this. So it's got a big hit on them in the context of asthma and all those afflictions. And, to me, it's all part of the poverty statistic as well. So you might reduce the air quality and therefore hopefully reduce asthma, but it's so much linked to all the other aspects as well. In that context, what are some of the key views that have been shared by Māori in this space to you?
Through the chair, sorry. Key views have been concern around fuel poverty. And the taking of wood burners, leaving cold, damp homes, and so sort of fixing one issue, like you say, but then creating another one. So that has always been forefront on our minds and will continue to be when we're looking at what actions could be taken. And I think our incentives have moved towards taking that sort of whole of house approach, where we're not leaving a cold, damp home just for the sake of improving the air.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to reinforce again the level of disproportionate representation as a matter of considerations around equity of access.
Councillor White, any further questions or comments? There being none, there are...
Yep.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Winters.
I also just wanted to ask, Madam Chair, the new airshed has been expanded. It's been re-gazetted. It's been expanded. Is it a fixed boundary, Karen, or is it expanding as new subdivisions come on stream out in the Ofota area? Because I'm just a bit concerned that if it's a fixed boundary, we're going to go through this whole process again.
Through the chair, the re-gazettal ended up with, it is a fixed boundary, but what we did was take it as wide as we possibly could to try and future-proof it. We've covered all the proposed structure plan areas and actually gone further up the Caldera Rim to follow property boundaries, because we know that zoning, can move and developments can occur where they're not currently zoned. So we believe that we have tried to future-proof that.
Thank you for that.
Okay, councillors, so we have 4 recommendations. The 4th one was proposed by Councillor Thurston, which is to maintain the public engagement and communications, whatever. So I'm going to move those 4 recommendations, seconded by Councillor White. All those in favour, aye. Against, and it's carried. And congratulations again, Karen, to you and your team, and thank you for your presentation and report today. Excellent, wonderful news. We're now moving to the report on the overview of the emissions reduction plan. Jane, welcome. So sorry, we've got a pretty formidable front row here. Boy. So welcome, and Dean Howie. I think you councillors know Dean from Bay of Connections, and obviously know the rest. So Jane, are you kicking off?
Yes, kia ora koutou. We just have a few very short slide presentation for you. We really wanted to focus on questions and discussions, so essentially taking the papers as read. And Dean and I will be doing a bit of a double act between our 2 papers. Before that, just had 3 minor corrections to my paper, which starts on page 128. Just in relation to some figures from MFE, we were waiting clarification about how they were interpreted, and that didn't come through until after the papers were finalised. So page 6, page 1 through 3, section 4.1.1, in the second sentence, the words per year needs to be replaced with over 2022 to 25. And it's the same correction for the other 2, which are page 137, section 4.4, second sentence again, per year replaced with over 2022 to 25, and page 138,
section 4.5, again, second sentence per year replaced with 2022 to 25. So very briefly, the emissions reduction plan was released in May this year, and I think many of the comments this morning that were referred to issues with the National Adaptation Plan could probably be said the same for the emissions reduction plan. It's very much a starting point. It's quite a hefty document. It sets out the carbon budgets for the next 3 sets of budgets, which take us up to 2035. The plan itself is focused on the first emissions budget, but it's going to be a rolling process of one in a series of emissions reduction plans. So we're not expecting this to do everything, but it's the starting point. And it's set out across 3 overarching themes, some system settings and sector plans, and the actions are spread across all of those areas. And some of the actions are already in train and in process. So in some ways, it's a useful collection of getting all the related actions into one place. And again, some of them cross across to the National Adaptation Plan as well, such as the Maori Climate Action Platform. So there's some parallel actions where central government's trying to make the linkages between climate resilience and emissions reduction. That's just a brief overview. I'll hand over to Dean now.
Tēnā koutou katoa, thank you for your time. Like Jane, I'll just make a couple of sort of corrections, I guess, that have been brought to my attention. So on page 176, a couple of bullet points related to the manufacturing sector. Fertiliser manufacturing is actually fertiliser bulk storage, and I think that's due to a nuance in how the data is presented from Infometrics, but I will follow that up. And also the second bullet point on that same page around dairy product manufacturing is an emission of Whakatane district, and obviously the importance of the Edgecombe Pontera plant. So, my apologies. And just to note that the information in this report, the emissions information is based on 2019 data from Stats NZ, and the GDP employment figures are from Infometrics, which relate to the year to the end of March 2020. So there'll be some significant impacts on the economy that haven't been reflected in this data, particularly COVID, but also the closure of Kawerau Mill. So in a couple of years, that will come through the data. Going off. So yes, as James mentioned, this plan, there's a lot of sort of work that's still to come down the track in terms of development of some of the actions coming through. So it's hard to identify really specific impacts on the region's economy. However, it's a really useful signal for some of the future work that's going to be underway and where businesses and industry are expected to play their part. And industry is also already progressing a lot of initiatives to reduce emissions. And I think our region is pretty well placed to enable further industry decarbonisation. Probably goes without saying that economics will drive the investment decisions and change. Businesses will need to make that will be balancing up those the need for investment while also remaining competitive in their global and domestic markets. Emissions pricing in the ETS will obviously act as a disincentive. But once if industry can keep doing what they're doing and there's no change in purchasing behaviour from consumers, I think that's really the tipping point of where change will happen, is when purchasing decisions change. But obviously there's, in the emissions reduction plan, there's a lot of reference to finance and funding initiatives, and I think we'll see a lot of businesses take that up as they like to decarbonise their processes. Just quickly on workforce and skill development, there's several industry transformation plans currently being developed by central government as well that align to the emissions reduction plan. It's going to be really important that those are interconnected into the regional workforce plans that are developed by the Regional Skills Leadership Group to make sure that any opportunities and new employment growth areas are taken care of, and that industry and educators are working together to bring those opportunities to our communities. I will note that the recently released Bay of Plenty Regional Workforce Plan does note that there's currently not a strong link between climate change and workforce planning, but that group, the RSLG, has actually identified how they can work with stakeholders to help close that gap. And make sure there's smooth workforce transitions, particularly around new jobs and identification of future opportunities. You again. Just for Māori, obviously Māori unemployment is very high in construction, manufacturing, and the primary industries. So I think again, it's important that upskilling opportunities are available to all. They're very inclusive, and that to make sure that our transition to lower emissions alternatives don't negatively impact Māori businesses and communities. So just 5 sectors in our region contribute about 89% of the emissions. So that's manufacturing, construction, transport, agriculture and waste services, with agriculture responsible for about 53% of those. Obviously addressing agriculture emissions will very much hinge on government's decisions around he waka iki noa. And I know councillors had a presentation from Dairy NZ last week on those recommendations. One positive for our region is that horticulture makes up about 40% of the agriculture GDP, but only 10% of the emissions. So further development of horticulture is going to be quite important for us moving forward. We're blessed with geothermal resources in our region, which we can use for decarbonising industrial processes, particularly around food, dairy and wood processing. That can also be used to produce biomass that creates a transportable energy solution for businesses who can't be located on the top of geothermal resources. We need to make sure that current and future use of our geothermal resources remains within sustainable limits. Transport is probably no surprise that using rail is really important for us to keep limit the number of truck movements. And also initiatives around hydrogen and electric vehicles will be very important in that space as well. Councils will be aware that Priority 1 is developing a hydrogen sort of cluster here in the Bay of Plenty, and it's got several companies involved across the vertical, and they'll have some refuelling routes up and running by the end of this year, early next year, I believe, in major transport routes. And just in terms of future growth, I think it's really important that we make sure we're growing our local economies in a sustainable way, and that growth is in less intensive sectors and processes. Those industry transformation plans I mentioned earlier will have a big role in where those future opportunities will be. But also a lot of economic development in our region, particularly in the wider reaches, that does actually involve creating more goods to transport to the Port of Tauranga. So those transport initiatives to make sure we're not growing our economy at the expense of our low carbon aspirations is really important. So I'll hand back to Jean.
Could I just a question of clarification here, please? You said that horticulture is 40% of GDP and 10% of the emissions. Is that Eastern Bay, Western Bay, Bay-wide, what?
So that's Bay-wide, and that is, sorry, that's 40% of agricultural emissions and agricultural GDP. So
right, yeah, Chair, that's better.
Yeah, Madam Chair, we were informed at the committee Māori meeting on Tuesday around the issue of ETS and the exclusion of exotics from permanent forests, that decision has been repealed and removed or reconsidered. Do you have any latest on that particular situation? Because I know that Māori pushed really hard to have that repealed and exotics included in the permanent forests.
I don't have any further on that. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Dean. So this is just the last slide to highlight a few of the key implications for regional council. So transport is obviously a key focus for regional council, but is also a major focus in the ERP, with looking for a transformational shift within that space. It's also one of the areas where there are actually some quite specific actions and setting some targets around vehicle kilometres travelled. So we have Lorraine here to answer any questions around that, but there's also a more detailed analysis going to RTC in September that will look more closely at the transport actions. Similarly to the National Adaptation Plan, we're expecting to see the ERP reflected through the RM reforms. There's a focus on both climate resilience and emissions reduction, but again, with those pieces of legislation still being in draft, there's lack of clarity around exactly what that will look like for the moment. Also, for the current resource management system, our RPS, again, as with the NAP, will have to have regard to the ERP from November, as will consenting decisions. And that's been a piece of legislation that's been delayed, but will be coming in later this year. So that's got some imminent implications, particularly around consenting and having regard to greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, there's some national direction expected as to what that means in practice. But as far as I'm aware, that hasn't been produced yet. So staff in that area are monitoring that quite closely, because obviously that could have some quite significant implications for regional council in that space. The alignment of spending and investments, that's a sentence that's kind of buried within the ERP, but is probably quite a key one in that it refers to councils having to align their spending investments with climate change objectives. And there's nothing specific around what that means in practice, but I think that's a strong signal from central government that local government's really got to start putting that climate change lens over any of its spending and investment decisions. And that's going to be an important part of the thinking for the new council and the forthcoming LTP process, really embedding that thinking into where we're prioritising and putting our resources. And the final point really is to say that, you know, emissions reductions is going to touch on all areas of council operations. And whilst there might not be specific actions across all council activities within this ERP, there'll be future ERPs coming through, and we can expect to see emissions reduction becoming a much more of a focus. So this is really the start of that emissions reduction journey, and having that framework set by national government to enable local government to pay more attention and put more emphasis on that area. So now it's just happy to take any questions or comments.
Well, thank you, Jane and Dean, for that, and the rest of the team. I think the fourth bullet point there, for those councillors who are going to come back onto the new council, need to have that top of mind, because there is no question that we're going to have a framework which has regard to this, and indeed the costs of not lowering emissions. Anyway, questions and comments from councillors. Do I have any? I'm sure that Councillor Nees, I beg your pardon, Councillor White and then Councillor Nees.
Kia ora, thanks for your report. Under item 4.6, you make a comment about equitable transition. And in there, you also talk about enabling Māori regional economies. And you mentioned Toi Rawa in that particular space as one example of that. How is that going?
4.6, is that?
Have I got the wrong?
So through the chair, it's page 139 of the agendas, section 4.6 of Jane Palmer's paper. But to answer the question in terms of how we're linking with Toi Rawa, we continue to support Toi Rawa quite actively in our connections and our work. And I'm not sure whether, Dean, you wanted to add anything further?
No, yes, liaising with them fairly regularly. I know they've got a Whenua Ora strategic case, which is imminent to be presented back to council. So, but yeah, just trying to keep across their work streams as much as possible and what they're doing. So.
I just wanted to support your notion of equitable transitioning. Thank you.
Councillor Nees.
Well, thank you. Firstly, thank you for a very full summary of the content of the ERP and potential impacts for both the regional council and the economy. I guess my overarching comment was the covering report seemed very passive. We've got a declaration of a climate emergency, and climate change is one of our strategic priorities. And I note the comment that there are few direct implications for council in the near term for strategies and initiatives outlined in the ERP, but that we need to have a greater role in implementation going forward. And then under risks and mitigation, that the Commission has to report on the adequacy of the ERP and its progress, and in order to do so, it may request information on the steps being taken by councils to give effect to the ERP and reduce emissions. So at the very least, what I would like to see as a result of this report is a whole list of actions that council needs to be considering as a result of the direction that's been very clearly pointed within both the National Adaptation Plan and the Emissions Reduction Plan. Because we are supposed to be leaders in this space. We said we wanted to be leaders in the Bay of Plenty, and we've now got a national document which is pointing the way forward, and I think we need to be picking up on the directions given, identifying what that means for us and what it might cost us to actually start implementing or progress towards implementation now. And I hope that we can be ambitious about that. And a couple of examples of how we need to be picking it up now and going forward is with the Regional Public Transport Plan. We've had submissions already that people want to see much more ambitious emission reduction targets within the plan. They want really good data so that we can measure how we are delivering on those emissions reductions. So I do hope that Lorraine and her team are beavering away very hard to bring us in our deliberations papers things that we need to be considered that are coming through from this document, so that we don't have a public transport plan that is woefully out of date, because it'll be another 3 years before we review it. So we need to be proactive about picking up the directions in these documents so that the public transport plan is actually enduring. Another example is Action 7.4, where it's talking about spatial plans taking into consideration emissions, and we need to factor that in any review of smart growth, for example, going forward. So there's a whole lot. It wasn't couched as this is a must do, but this is the clear direction we want to go in. And I think our council needs to be saying, okay, got that. We need to be thinking about this. We need to be doing that. And I've been having a look at a number of other councils and where they're going with this, and they are going hard and they are going fast. You've only got to look at the targets that Waikato's putting in their public transport plan, what Wellington's doing. And if we want to be leaders, we've got to be doing the same. Thank you.
Did you all get that clear message? Thanks, Jane. Well said. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Brunning.
Well, it just might be a final comment as I leave this organisation, but the reality is that we're a country of 5 million people, and we get compared with Britain, who's reduced their carbon footprint by 40%, and the US by 20%. And they're totally different economies and can do it different ways. We are already reliant on renewable energy for our electricity, and we will over time convert that to our transportation system. But to continue to spend $40 million in this organisation on transportation of public transport is unsustainable. And so I think we've just got to have a touch of realism matched with the enthusiasm of the ideology of some of this stuff that is not realistic in New Zealand.
Thank you, Councillor Brunning. Councillor von Dadelsson.
Yes, as chair of the hearings committee, can I just remind Councillor Nees that she is a hearings commissioner on this, and speaking has put her in a prejudicial position. So just other commissioners, please be careful what you say while we're in the proceeds of a hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions or comments? My observation, and firstly, I'd like to thank staff for the reports. And I was particularly grateful, particularly Jane, for comments, for example, under 7.4. We've got spatial planning, but how are we going to have regards to emissions reductions, etc.? So thank you for that. I thought that was, your paper was well positioned in that regard. But it strikes me that climate change, carbon emissions is right across our organisation. It's metrics management at best. And can I just understand, are you the overarching coordinator of all matters climate change in this matrix environment? Or I just need to understand the management and operational structure, because this is like an octopus and its tentacles are everywhere. And I hope I haven't put you in an invidious position, but I do want to understand how that matrix is actually operating.
So through the chair, we've got a cross-council team on climate change, led by Chris Ingle as the lead GM, and some of our key staff on that obviously is Jane Palmer, and then we've got connections all across. Yeah, I don't know, Jane, if you want to add anything further.
Yes, just to say, because climate change touches us on all areas, whilst I've got a role in connecting with the different areas, it's not my role to kind of corral it all together. That's certainly done through the climate change programme. But for the paper, I reached out to various staff within the various areas to get their input into the paper. So my role in all of this is trying to make those connections and ensure that that thinking around climate change is embedded in each of the different functions across council. So I hope that helps clarify.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm sure the new council will, want to understand just how, not only strategically, but, at an operations level, this is managed. Can I just, sorry, Namuta, yes?
Oh, and just to note, Nick Newman obviously heads up our climate change adaptation work, and you've heard from him earlier today as well.
So just in that regard, Nick, another staff member, Jane, and I were fortunate last week to meet with Minister Shaw and others in terms of matters climate change, and it was an extremely useful discussion, I thought. And one of the things that really struck me was his comment that in terms of transport emissions, it's not so much the vehicular emissions as it is the infrastructure. And Jane makes the very good point here that here we are planning for a whole lot of new infrastructure, and how we actually going to manage the emissions in relation to that. But I do want to leave a comment, and that is, we can cost up what this is going to cost us. We need to also have regard to, if we don't do this, what's it going to cost us? And I always remember Councillor Holmes saying there was no planet B. Anyway, I'm going to move receipt of Jane's report. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nees? Yes, all those in favour, aye, against, and carried. And in terms of the same for Dean's report, I'll move. Seconded, Councillor von Dardelson. All those in favour, against, carried. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Thurston. I will let you have a crack at the next one. So we're now public exclusion. Thank you very much indeed. Much appreciated. Great work. Now going to move to exclude the public from the meeting. I'll so move, seconded by Councillor